All right. Welcome, everyone. Happy Wednesday and welcome to Working Wednesday. But today we're going to listen to Kat Trataris talk about using your words in a professional development workshop on building out and sprucing up your application documents. Take it away, Kat.
Thanks, Michelle. Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to be talking to all of you about documents, which I think no one is typically excited about. But we're going to go through a number of documents, starting with more art-focused related ones like your CV and bio, and moving into professional job-related ones like your resume and cover letter. The nice thing about kind of starting the process of working through all of these documents is that you have a place where you can go to reference information about yourself that's already kind of built out and edited and ready to go. But B, you can actually kind of use these things across the board. So your artist bio can be something you pull from into your resume for a job. And these things can kind of all build on top of each other to make the workload a little less stressful. One way I like to kind of frame building out these documents is thinking about how you're using your words to kind of, what I say here is like, be the ambassador of your own story. In terms of getting art shows or opportunities or jobs, a lot of us kind of fall short in getting what we want out of these opportunities by not actually just thinking through how we're actually communicating about ourselves. We know a lot about ourselves and other people don't have that information at hand, and kind of teasing out how you want people to view your art practice, how you want people to view you as an employee before you actually have these meetings with people can be really helpful for you to paint an accurate picture instead of going into something unprepared. So thinking about ways to kind of be an ambassador for yourself. So we're going to start with captions. This is kind of the most simple format in terms of artwork. A lot of galleries will have an artist or like a checklist of images, or if your work makes it into a publication, it will need to be captioned. Captions are helpful because it'll help anybody who is looking at the artwork image, even if they don't read the article, to actually know who made the work, what it's called, when it was made, all these kinds of facts that can get lost in translation, especially on the internet. And the caption should always include the things listed here, which is the artist name, the title of the work, the date of the work, the medium, and the dimensions. So for a lot of these initial examples, I pulled work from an exhibition that happened in January 2019 in the Walter McBean Galleries, called Vanguard Revisited: Poetic Politics and Black Futures. This show featured work by artists who are deceased as well as artists who are living. And so there's kind of a nice collection of ways to kind of talk about artists based on if they're alive, if it's a historical piece, if it's a contemporary piece, this kind of thing. This work specifically is made by an artist collective called 5/5. So the artist's name in this case is 5/5. The title of the work is italicized. You can have it either italicized or in quotes, as you can kind of see on the hyperallergic article, it's in quotes. And they purposefully don't have it capitalized, which you can kind of see in hyperallergic is an error. And then for every single line item, you start it as if it was a new sentence. So oil paintings is capitalized. Dimensions variable is capitalized. There are some variations here, like oil paintings, sculptures, photographs are all capitalized. You could start with just oil paintings being capitalized and the rest of them uncapitalized. Sometimes it kind of depends on whether or not some of these objects have a name specifically, like if it was the Bible, maybe you would always keep Bible capitalized, or if you don't view it as the name pronoun Bible, you would uncapitalize it because it's just an object. In terms of dimensions too, I think we're going to go to the next slide. You'll see there's a lot of different ways to kind of approach this based on your practice. I think artists sometimes get caught up, especially if they work in non-traditional mediums, with how to kind of apply this very specific way of talking about work through the caption. And the piece that was in the last slide was actually an installation. So in terms of the medium, we included all of the mediums and all of the pieces in the installation itself, instead of listing each specific work. So one thing you can do here is, in terms of the artist name, is that you should definitely be consistent. I used to go by Kat Trataris. I recently started to go by Kat Trataris. And I have had to go through all of my documents and online website presence and everything and make sure that my name is the same across the board. You can kind of see, if you Google yourself, if you've ever changed the name that you're going by, that everything will show up based on that specific name. So, you know, because I made this change when I was less visible or doing less stuff, a lot of things come up under Kat Trataris, but essentially if you do change your name, it will change how visible you are online. So it's good to kind of think about consistency and how that affects that visibility. Title of the work should always be italicized so that people know. Italicized helps people to know that it's not a quote taken from a book or whatever. It's always the title. It's always italicized. The date of the work, so the date that the work was completed. Some people will have a piece that they work on once a year for 10 years. If that happened, then the piece was completed over a period of 10 years between 2010 and 2020. You can say that it was completed 2020. If you want to kind of communicate the scope of this piece taking place over 10 years, you can put 2010 to 2020. This is kind of similar in the point in which I'm talking about projects that have a ongoing length. And if the project itself had many iterations, then you can kind of also list those iterations. So if you did a performance piece once in 2012 and then again in 2014, but you're showing one documentation or both documentations together, it's good to kind of list both of those things. The medium is kind of the most playful area out of the caption, because you can kind of give some conceptual background to the work. I have a friend who works primarily with secondhand or thrifted fabrics, and so we had a lot of conversations about, like, is it garbage? Is it studio detritus? Is it thrifted? Is it secondhand? Is it found? All of these things kind of give the person looking at the work a different conceptual vision, or like how they envision the artist working. If they found it versus it was thrifted, that gives a different connotation to the piece. With dimensions, it's good to think about the art world as being like an international space, especially for anything that you have online. So it's really good to write things out in full instead of using markers that denote inches or feet. Using the whole word inches allows people who may not be familiar with inch demarkers in the United States to actually understand what dimension of the work is. For video work or for installations, you can talk about either the time length, you can denote whether it's on loop or if it isn't, and then with dimensions variable is kind of what I always default to an installation, unless the installation every time it's done has the same exact dimensions. So a list of works is then built out of the captions and the images of the work itself. So if you can provide the gallery with a lot of this information ahead of time, it can make it really easy to build out this list of works. A list of works is used for many purposes. It's used for gallery goers to have more information when they're going around the space looking at the work. It's used for gallerists to email to their clients who might be interested in purchasing works. A lot of online databases use this, and you can actually provide a list of works to a press person to use as the captions. So all of the things we just covered would be in the list of works, and If you are providing images in a folder with a list of works, it's good for everything to be numbered and to have these kind of like file name synchronicity that allows it to be easy to understand what belongs to what, so there's no confusion. So your artist bio, this is now moving more out of the realm of practical information and into the realm of personal, but it's still very much supposed to be a practical kind of explanation of what you have been up to. So the word bio is combining the idea of life occurring. And so you want to talk about what you've been doing, but you also still want to do it in very plain and factual language. So this should not be an aspirational bio. This is not like I hope to be, this is not I wish to be. This is I was born here, I went to school here, I've shown at these 3 galleries or cafes or parks or whatever. I have received this type of recognition and I work at this place. A lot of people use bios to also contextualize, like, why is this person speaking to me right now? Bios are read oftentimes before a speaker moves on with their presentation, and a lot of this information can help to give context for why this artist is present for this specific reason. So bio can also be really different based on whether or not the artist is dead, alive, whether or not the work is historical or contemporary. So pulling from the Black Panthers exhibition, this is the bios of 2 artists, or 1 artist, sorry, Ruth Marion Burke, who is no longer alive. And there's a lot more information here because this bio is kind of giving a full vision of her entire life from beginning to end, giving information about where she lived, where she moved, where she's come from, where she went to school, who she studied with, and giving a full vision of essentially her life's accomplishments. Contemporary artists, I always suggest for it to be, you know, short, sweet, but also relevant. So a lot of artists, some artists like to put what their medium is and what the kind of a small amount of conceptual information about their practice, and some artists don't. I think that you should choose what you prefer. If you feel like your practice conceptually is harder to grasp visually, then having a little bit about your practice in your bio can just kind of provide that context. If you have a lot of stuff in your bio already, I would hold back and be more restrained and kind of just provide the factual information. The same way that you will continue to edit all of these documents, like your CV, your resume, your cover letter, you should be regularly going into your bio, pulling out old things. You know, I showed at a lot of spaces when I was younger that are not necessarily art spaces that exist anymore, or they were cafes or salons, which meant more to me at the time than they do now. And so I have pulled those out of my bio and replaced them with other spaces that I feel like are more relevant to my professional career. Another thing you can think about is, you know, a lot of SFAI students, alumni, and artists in general are very multidisciplinary. So you may have a bio for your curatorial practice that is completely separate from your artistic practice. You might have them all combined into one. I think it's difficult to sometimes make them all make sense together. I, at one point, founded a gallery space. I also run a group called the Women Art Handlers, and I also have an artistic practice. So trying to mix them all together doesn't typically make sense. And I definitely keep a number of bios at hand depending on the context of the situation. So if I'm being asked to speak in terms of my art practice, I'll provide an artist bio. An art collective will also have its own bio, and I like how this one kind of brings in each artist's and kind of points to their work a little bit. So you could look at this bio, you could look at an image of an installation, and you could kind of see how each artist might be functioning in the work. So the artist statement. Now we're kind of moving from the factual information about you and into the conceptual information about your practice. What I would say here is still to be as concise and clear and in plain language as possible. I found when I was starting to write my artist statements in grad school that I was getting very like art talky or speaky and using a lot of big words I had recently learned to kind of give myself importance. And that approach did not actually communicate to a public or to a person who would give me an opportunity. It kind of actually was hiding the conceptual premise I was really going for. You can be very clear and poetic simultaneously, even though that does not seem possible. But I think it's good to kind of come into your artist statement being like, I am interested in the way that society confines individuals. I study the social patterns of children to think about the way that adults are confined later on. And you can kind of have this very plain language way of speaking, and then you back it up with your actual artwork. So talking about your material in relationship to your concept, you can say, in my painting, you will see children with large heads. I don't know, I'm merely making this up, but essentially you can kind of say the large heads of the children demonstrates the way that adulthood continues on from the life of the child. Essentially, there's ways to point to both your ideas, the image of what is actually the big picture idea. So like, how does this practice apply to everyone, essentially, or a large populace instead of just you? And then how does your material reflect this concept? Or how does your imagery reflect this concept? And lastly, it's kind of like, why should people care about your practice? Are you bringing new information to light? Are you adding to a conversation that has already happened? Are you trying to make people happy? There are many reasons that are urgent and important for making work that can range dramatically, but it's important that you know who you're talking to, why you're doing what you do, and why you think it's important, and how to actually communicate that importance to somebody. The fact that you are making work does obviously give value to the work itself, but the more value you can imbue in your practice that other people can see and read and understand, the easier it is for people to support your practice. There's a lot of ways to talk about your work that can kind of change over time. So I love these two different versions of artist statements. There's this kind of famous one that blew up on the internet by Kara Walker, and it's kind of like the anti-artist statement, followed by what is kind of this amazingly practical bio. I love the emotional tone followed by this like really cold practical description. And so, you know, you can use your artist statement as a way to continue with your practice, especially if you've written enough of them and you're starting to like really get a grasp of these main points. You can start to play with the format of how you deliver them. Kara Walker is speaking from a place in this artist statement that very much reflects her practice as well. And then Klaus Oldenburg, I mean, I've just always loved this artist statement because it relates a lot to things that I'm interested in. But there's kind of this idea here of this sort of like manifesto vibe, but kind of saying like what Klaus Oldenburg is interested in terms of art and the type of artwork he supports. And in that way, you can kind of see his artwork appear in these supporting statements. So I am for an art that imitates the human, that is comic if necessary, or violent, or whatever is necessary. You can kind of see a lot of like picturesque things coming out of here. You can see conceptual ideas coming out of here, but it's not typical in the way that I was just outlining. If you're interested in kind of like working in a more alternative approach related to your art statement, I recommend kind of breaking down your artist statement into the chunks that I was just describing, and then feeling out how to play with each of those chunks and how to intermingle them into different types of conceptual writing. I've seen a lot of artist statements that are poems. I mean, I'm personally a short and sweet kind of person. I like things that can go straight to the point. But if you feel like you have a lot to say and you can write it in a way that is compelling and makes people want to keep reading it, then I encourage you to go with whatever format feels good to you. A CV. This is like an old version of my CV. So a CV is also kind of a very like to the point document. And I think it is a great place to talk about all the different ways that your art practice is culminated. So the same way some people take an approach where they kind of load up their CV, and if it's like 20 pages long, that's cool. I am more interested in kind of refining over time, and I don't think that means that you need to like remove your BFA show from 10 years ago necessarily, but you know, especially if you're having shows regularly at the Diego Gallery, you don't necessarily need every Diego Gallery show listed when you're 6 to 10 years out of school and you've had a lot of other experiences. So it's good to kind of go back into your CV and think about what is actually pointing to the ways in which your practice, you want your practice to be seen. Which of these exhibitions really served your practice? And, you know, when people Google these things or look up these galleries and find your work, are you proud of what is there? We make things all the time. An art practice is an experiment. It's good to show things, whether or not you wind up liking them later. You don't have to like everything you've made, and you don't have to make available everything you've ever made either. Being restrained, unless you're someone who's kind of into the maximalist approach, can kind of just help you to keep clarity around your vision and how it's being communicated. Here I have education listed first, awards and residencies, solo exhibitions, and then collaborative projects. If you don't have any solo exhibitions yet, just don't put it on there. And then you can go into selected group exhibitions. Mine has more than this, but I'm just showing you kind of the formatting: name of show, name of gallery, location, and length of exhibition. Not everybody puts length of exhibition, but because I have some pieces like Teenage Tactical Training that's a permanent installation, that feels important to me, so I wanted to keep that duration visible. Publications and lectures, if they have links, definitely embed them into your CV. One thing I highly recommend is that any press you ever get or any interview you have that is on a soundbite clip somewhere on some website is to download that web page or copy paste it and make it into a cleaner version of itself. Download that clip and keep it for your records, and link to your own more polished version of that record, because those websites will eventually likely go stale, and links to articles that you may have loved may disappear. So it's, I think, a very good practice to consistently catalog your own successes. All right, so now we're going to kind of shift gears from art related opportunities and documentation to jobs. Does anybody have questions they want to ask right now about documents specific to art practices? If not, I will take more questions at the end, because I know I'm like this is like a lot of verbal information, and it's a lot of visually verbal information. Jobs. It's a strange time to be preparing yourself to look for jobs because of layoffs happening everywhere and the shifting job market, but jobs will always need to be done, work will always exist, and there will always be a job for you. So there's no better time than the present once you're already in the process of kind of working on these documents to kind of keep the flow going and redirect your attention to employment. These 4 links at the top are my favorite places to look for job listings. And Artist List Bay Area is actually run by local artists, and it has a lot of really cool resources that are calendar listings of exhibitions coming up. They've really taken a really cool approach to pushing out information about online content during this time. And they also have a job listing board where people, specifically in the Bay Area, are posting arts related jobs. New York Foundation for the Arts, even though it is founded and located in New York, does have job listings in other cities. So I definitely recommend looking there. And also if you're looking to move, this New York Foundation for the Arts is a pretty good place to find a lot of different job listings. Jobs.art is a very cool new website that was created by Art Handler Mag. There's a lot of, you'll see a lot of repeating listings across these areas, but the first 3 are the top, I would say, arts related job sites. Jobs.art posts a lot of different things in different places, and they also have an Instagram. And so if you want to follow Jobs.art on Instagram, they oftentimes will post job listings in their stories and stuff too. So it's kind of a nice way to casually come across new opportunities. And then there's LinkedIn. LinkedIn is definitely more work. It's really good to have, even just as a landing page for the history of your employment. And LinkedIn is definitely the best place to go look for people to be your references for other jobs. So there's ways, essentially, if you can find that you have a connection at a company that you want to work for, then it's so much more likely that you will get an interview if you can get a recommendation from someone that already works there. A lot of companies have specific portals for employees to put in references of people they think would be good fits rather than just the normal application portal. And although it may seem strange, the whole operation of networking and how LinkedIn kind of functions is that you could essentially go out of your way to try to connect with someone that works at a company you want to work for and see if there's a way that they can recommend you or help you to get a job. So this is this thing where it's kind of a friend of a friend of a friend, but it can go a long way in making your job hunts easier. There are also a lot of recruiters on LinkedIn, and recruiters, that's someone's entire job is to find good applicants. So if you have a LinkedIn profile that's up to date, the likelihood of being picked up by a recruiter is much higher. I will say that LinkedIn has not been very well geared towards art world jobs until sort of recently. I think that a lot more art people are getting on LinkedIn, and I've actually found it to also be a very cool place for industry related news. It's starting to feel a little bit more like a business version of Facebook. And so there's been a lot of cool articles about the way tech companies are working with arts organizations or the ways that museums or galleries are adapting. And it's been a cool research tool for me as well. Now the process of actually figuring out what job to apply for and if that job is good for you. I think what's difficult about job hunting is that, we all need jobs. There can be a lot of pressure to find a job. You can feel like you just need to accept whatever comes your way, even if it's not what you want. And I would say that there is definitely a need to be employed and to have a job, but also that there's multiple steps you can take to kind of try and help yourself to make your way into a job that is suitable for you. a job that is suitable for you is based on a number of factors. And it's not only about how does this job serve you, but it's do you have the skills or desire to serve this job? You know, you could be good at something, but if you aren't motivated to do it, you may not make the best employee in that role. The same way that there might be someone else who's like really excited about data entry. So it's good to kind of keep in consideration when you're looking for jobs, like how does the idea of this job make you feel when you imagine working there? Do you feel nervous? You know, you might think nervous is a bad feeling, but it actually kind of means that you're experiencing some sort of feeling about the job instead of just being like, okay, whatever, it's a job. Is this job a fit for you in terms of schedule, pay, and benefits? You know, not everybody's looking for a full-time job, but some people are. Are you someone who is working freelance and is looking for something part-time to kind of fill in those gaps? Do you only want to work at night? You know, if you have a hard time getting up in the morning and this job needs you to be there every day on time at 8 a.m., it may not be a good fit. So all these things are kind of about trying to set yourself up for success in terms of the expectations you're placing on yourself and the expectations that the job will place on you and how good you feel about being able to perform that job. Outside of kind of these things that are more an internal check-in, I definitely would recommend looking into the business itself and feeling out the interview with the interviewer. Although it feels like when you're being interviewed that someone is there to judge your worth, you're also there to feel out the people who you will be working with, the place you'll be working at, and the people you're going to be working for. They need to be able to treat you with respect and act professionally. And if you go into an interview and someone is being rude, if someone is being condescending, if it seems clear that your interviewer is not sensitive to, you know, people of diverse backgrounds, unless you're in a really dire situation, I just would recommend walking away and, you know, chalking up that interview experience to being able to get some practice done. Another way you can look is, you know, as you're leaving or entering the place, kind of looking around at other employees in the space. Do they seem happy to be there? If it's a desk job, are people like settled in? Does the place feel welcoming, or is it really sparse? You can see how much people are invested in a space and in a job in a very clear way. And I think a lot of times we want to ignore red flags because we're looking for employment and we think that, you know, we can make it better, but it's kind of hard to permanently alter work culture. So if a place doesn't feel good and you can pass on that job, then I would recommend continuing your hunt to find something that will serve you. Also, another thing I would like to say in terms of this tips here is that you may not get, you will not get everything you want from the beginning, but negotiating is part of being an employee. So, you know, getting the interview is the first step. Once you've been offered a position, you can kind of negotiate from there in terms of what you need and where there's wiggle room or flexibility. And then you can also be and should be in constant communication with your supervisor about how you can grow in the position, opportunities that you can get, benefits that you can have, or, you know, markers for pay increase. All these kinds of things are conversations that should be kind of a constant flow that you can build into your discussions with your supervisor. You should feel like you can grow in a job. Your resume. So resume is very much kind of like the same format as the CV, except there's a little bit more narrative. I would approach a resume very like in a black and white manner. You know, what is the most recent and relevant work experience? I worked at Starbucks for a couple of years in college. I did a lot of food service. I mean, I've worked a million different odd jobs. There was a point in which I was able to kind of pull a lot of those jobs off of my resume to focus more on the types of work I was interested in, which was arts and education. So, you know, getting rid of a job you had 10 years ago doesn't mean you haven't been employed for 10 years. It just means that the jobs you had 10 years ago are no longer relevant to the jobs you're actually looking for. I'm a huge fan of bullet points, like anywhere from 2 to 4, maybe 5 per role. But this is like a short and sweet situation as well, where they say you have about 30 seconds for someone to look at your resume. Each of these documents is to kind of get you to the next step. So the resume gets you the interview gets you in conversation, and possibly gets you a job offer. The job offer itself is then the point of negotiation before you accept or deny a job. It's also really good that you are kind of working on your resume the same way you might have multiple bios depending on the role that you are for an art show or for an art opportunity. You should definitely tailor your resumes. If you have a lot of experience teaching, but you also have a lot of experience doing art handling, it's better to have 2 separate resumes, one for each, rather than to try and blend them together. There's a lot of, I think, pressure for people to feel like they need to demonstrate that they can bend over backwards and perform any duty that an employer puts on them. But realistically, being a jack of all trades is not something that actually sells your skill set. Being adaptable and being solution oriented and these kinds of verbiage that points to the fact that you are quick on your feet and can do a lot of different things, I think are good to include. But if I'm looking to hire someone to be a teacher, I want to know what their experience is teaching. So you can kind of set up your resume while you have the job description open. And essentially, I would recommend literally copying and pasting areas from the job description into your resume and then editing them, because it helps when you can see things in the job description that say developing curriculums for elementary students. You're like, oh, I've done that. Put it right in. When someone is looking over your resume, they are literally looking for points that match the job description. What if you don't have a lot of work experience? This is how everyone starts out. I think the best approach you can have is to think about, what are your skills? What are the skills necessary for the job you're looking for? And what have you done or participated in so far that can kind of demonstrate this? If you have been volunteering teaching kids art every Wednesday for the past 2 years, even though that may or may not have been paid, that is definitely work experience that you should list. If you started a zine, that's an entrepreneurial endeavor. You kind of operated as a project lead. There are skills that you've developed in different ways that may not be typically categorized as jobs or may not have been paid work. But the fact that you did that labor should go recognized, and it's good to kind of contribute or figure out how to phrase that work to demonstrate your skill set. I also highly recommend, instead of erring on the side of I'm afraid of lying about something, I would err on the side of making yourself sound good. A resume is also not an aspirational document, but a lot of, especially women, undermine their skill sets. So the more you can kind of just, fake it till you make it, I definitely think is the way to go, because the resume gets you in the room with the interview. And if you can't answer the interview questions well, it'll be very clear. So definitely shoot for jobs that you really want. See how it goes. If you're not a good fit yet, that's okay. These are some examples of resumes that I've pulled up that I like. I'm really into this kind of 2-column-esque version of seeing things. I think it's super clear when you have the title of your job bolded and the date range is really near the title of the job. And you can kind of see here how action-oriented language is being used in all of these bullet points. So developed, increased, implementing, communicated, showed patrons. There's you're kind of painting this picture of you working in space. When I think of someone showing patrons where to find the library resources, I can see them talking with a client, showing them around. So you're trying to paint a picture of how you work as an employee. It's great to talk about skills that aren't listed in any of these jobs. Like if you're working as a teacher, you may not need to say in that job description that you have skills in Adobe Photoshop or in Word, but those skills are important, and those can be listed as skills because they apply to all your work across the board. One of these resumes has a picture. I've never put my picture on anything. I think it's a little odd, but some people like it and think it's friendly. So, you know, go with your gut on that one. Cover letter. So this is kind of an expansion of your resume, the same way that your artist statement is an expansion of your bio. You're trying to now narrativize what you do. And you want to kind of stay with this very like action-oriented language, kind of talking about what you deliver and what you bring to the company. You know, a lot of this is you trying to sell yourself. So you're trying to really clearly explain what you've done, how it was beneficial to the company, and how you're going to bring that thing or bring that type of work ethic to this new job. So you really want to be direct. If you have a contact, like I was saying earlier, definitely say that the contact recommended that you apply. Stating an accomplishment, expressing excitement, using keywords, and giving examples. So you can kind of see in this example a good way of starting out a cover letter. The same way I would say your resume should not be longer than 1 page, I don't think your cover letter should be longer than 1 page either. You want to be clear, you want to be concise, and you want to capture someone's attention as much as possible. So now I'm going to show a lot of funny memes related to job hunting because it's tough out there and you got to laugh sometimes. The last tip I would have, and this is something I did not start doing until a few years ago, and I would have benefited dramatically from this help, is having someone proofread and edit all of your documents from now until ever. It may seem very weird to have someone proofread your resume, but you know, spelling errors don't really bode well. Making sure that like the thing that you think you're saying clearly is actually coming across to another person without it risking your job opportunity because you're actually having this conversation with a third party. Editing and proofreading by other people is highly, highly recommended. All right. I wish this was on my car. I thought this was really funny. So, you know, I think that the dressing for the job you want is less of a thing, but it's still kind of a thing. And if you like to dress well or dress interestingly, you know, that can be part of what you're looking for in a job, is the freedom of expression through your clothing options. And the art world definitely provides many of those opportunities. This is kind of what I was talking about in terms of looking for jobs, where I love this one from Jerry Gagosian that says, looking for someone 25 years old with 30 years of work experience. You know, a lot of jobs are looking for everything and not willing to give anything. Just hard pass on those positions. You're not going to like it anyways. And this is kind of a hilarious but great demonstration of the fact that like there are many ways to kind of show yourself, the same way you might have more than one resume. Think about how you look on Facebook versus LinkedIn versus Instagram. There are many facets to you, and it can be good to be able to present all of them in the proper context. So thank you all so much for listening to me go on and on about documents. And I hope this was helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions. This will be also online like the rest of them, so you can kind of go over these slides more closely. And if you need some more resources, let me know. I'm wondering if you could provide an example of phrasing something like making a zine in a resume. So I guess in those situations, you kind of want to think about like, what was your role? And if you had a title, what would it be? Did you found the zine? Is it like a continuing project, or did you lead the project? So, you know, if you actually just led one zine project, you can call yourself project lead or publishing lead or something like that, and then kind of bullet point each of the things you did. So communicated with artists to collect materials, managed project deadlines, communicated with vendors, or even just like did the design and layout. If the project had a name or the zine had a name, you could put it there as essentially like the name of the employer, the way you might for like the title of a show, and put the same kind of location and date information. I hope that answered your question. Editor-in-chief, I think, is a great title. I think what's difficult with some of these, when you're kind of talking about your own projects, I think there's a lot of feeling like you're faking it, like that you don't actually deserve the title because someone else didn't give it to you. But it is good to kind of look at some of these titles and see the people who have those titles or the jobs that they've done. And if those are the skills and resources that you are bringing to the table, then you should definitely feel able to give yourself that title. I would say that like having a very serious, like quote unquote high level title next to other titles that are very low level or minimum wage or entry level, not low level, but entry level, might feel disparate. So kind of balancing out the full narrative of your job arc. I founded a gallery, and so, you know, I was a preparator at the same time. And so I think there was definitely a period where having gallery director and co-founder and then also preparator one felt like they didn't quite match each other. And that was kind of when I was like, okay, I just need to pull this type of work out into a different resume, or kind of just massage the situation with changing the titles around a little bit. If you created the project, you create your title, you know, do what kind of makes more sense. Also, you know, specifically for SFAI students, and I mean, I'm happy to help with other people as well, but if you need someone to look over your resume or CV or other documents, please feel free to make an appointment with me or come by during the exhibition's office hours, and I'm happy to look over your documents with you. I'll go back to this one. So the question is, do you have any recommendations for resume templates? I made mine in Photoshop because I don't like how hard it is to kind of like spatially organize Word documents. Michelle earlier was talking about using a program called Sketch that I'm not as familiar with. That's kind of more low key than Photoshop. I definitely recommend kind of following this format. This is essentially like the format that I copied. So, I mean, I think that anything that is very clear, I've seen a lot of stuff where you can kind of look at it and you feel a little overwhelmed by the information, or the text feels very crowded. If you look at a resume online in terms of a template and it feels hard to read, then it's going to be hard to read. So, you know, this templates that are in my presentation will be available, you know, once you can look at the YouTube video if you wanted to literally rip these off like I did. But I don't have like any recommendations for a specific template. I feel like I should have background music. Yeah, I did everything in Photoshop. Like I just did a text block for essentially this whole area is one. I didn't do this split section here. So I basically have one text block like this, and then I have another series of text blocks on the side, and then, you know, these two up here. And then I have it more on this side where I have a line going down the middle with the dates on the left. I guess besides, I also don't have this paragraph that kind of talks about yourself as an employee. I think that if you are new to the workforce, it's kind of nice to kind of give yourself a little small narrative that speaks to some of your very unique qualities. But if you have a lot more work experience, then, you know, you really don't really have a lot of room for that kind of thing. And this picture gets painted elsewhere. So you can use this to help flesh out your narrative if you feel like it needs a little bit more. I also do, now I'm thinking about it, recommend if you make your resume in Photoshop like I do, that you keep a Word document with all of this stuff in the Word document, because as a lot of these online web portals are very obnoxious, where they'll ask you to upload a resume as like an image or PDF, but then they'll also ask you to go in and copy and paste everything in again, because they basically have these computer systems that are combing your document for the action-oriented vocabulary. So it's kind of good to keep the Word document also updated with the Photoshop file so that you can open the Word document and quickly copy and paste that content. It's annoying, but useful. And I guess I didn't really cover like actual process of interviewing in this conversation, but you know, a lot of things apply the same way it would to a class or any of the presentations you've given in any other context, which is to be on time, be prepared, you know, be early really. If you think it's going to take you an hour to get there on the bus, give yourself a full hour and a half. Try to schedule your interview on a time where you're not going to be flustered getting there. You know, it's a first impression, and just being able to be calm, or, you know, at least collected. You're not necessarily, you're going to feel nervous, but being able to kind of take a moment to yourself, drink some water, review some of your documents, and feel prepared rather than rushing to something. Phone interviews and video interviews, which are also becoming more common, especially during COVID, I think can be a little difficult, because as everyone has noticed, the ability to kind of connect or read body language is much more difficult. But I like to follow the lead of the interviewer, really let them drive the conversation, and then fill in extra information where I can. But also just always end on a good note. Thank them for interviewing. Sometimes you're interviewing just to practice, or, you know, you're not always interviewing necessarily with the knowledge that you're going to get a job. Sometimes you're interviewing just to see what happens. And those connections, even if you don't get a job, usually pan out in some other way in the future too. All right, we have about 2 more minutes to the conversation. And like I said earlier, this YouTube video and some of these documents will be on the professional development webpage at sfai.edu/online-workshops. We have a lot more of these coming up over the next couple of weeks, so pop in when you can, and let us know how it's going. And I hope, you know, you're all doing well. All right, thank you all for coming.
Kat, sorry, thank you so much for all the information. Do I email you for an appointment to get, if I have a resume that needs to be reviewed, do I just email you for an appointment?
Yeah. just email me and tell me what your preferred time. My schedule's a little more looser, I think, than students because I don't have class blocks. So you can just email me with your preferred times. Like, give me like 2 or 3 and one of them should work.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right. See ya.
Bye, everybody.